Hi everyone, Salesforce Development Day 30. Now today we are going to quickly go through the previous session overview and we'll talk about the trigger. Today's topic is trigger. In the trigger, we will see why we are using the triggers and trigger syntax, and we'll see the couple of examples of trigger and what are the trigger events, what are the trigger context variables. And then finally, we'll have a conclusion and target. Now, what did we learn in the last session?
Schedule.
What did we learn in last session?
Schedule asynchronous with flexible.
Yes. Queuable. And then we saw the cron expression. Right. So today we will see the trigger. Now, first of all, why Salesforce is introduced the trigger? Now in Salesforce, we have so many objects out there, like opportunity, account, contact, and custom objects, right? So there are different objects out there. Now, on these objects, if I'm creating a record, or if I'm modifying a record, or if I'm deleting a record. So whenever I perform any event, if we wanted to execute certain logic at the backend, if we want to execute certain logic, that means now I have an account object. On this object, I wanted to there are different things I can perform on the record level. I can perform an insert, right? Creating the record, which is nothing but an insert. I can update the record. I can delete the record. So whenever we are performing these actions, and if we wanted to update certain logic from the code, on creation of record, on the update of record, on the deletion of record, immediately the logic has to be executed. So far, we have seen the asynchronous. Asynchronous is nothing but whenever the resource is available, then only the logic gets executed. But in this case, what we are expecting, as soon as the record is created, immediately the logic has to be executed. That means the user is waiting that whenever we want to go for immediate execution, immediate logic has to be executed. Then on the account level, on the object level, we will write a trigger. We will write a some class. So there is a some class we will write it. That means we will write certain logic. So when we write this certain logic, if you are writing this certain logic on the asynchronous, that means it's not a immediate. Based on the resource availability, it gets executed. But if I'm writing the same logic on the trigger, that means on the account object, we are writing a trigger and trigger is calling this certain logic. So what will happen? So whenever we are performing certain updates or insert or delete, undelete, whatever action I'm doing it. So through the trigger, we are going to execute a certain logic. Now trigger is on the object wise. That means if you want to execute the immediate logic, then on the account, you need to write a trigger on the account. If you want to execute the immediate logic on the opportunity, you need to write a trigger on the opportunity. So triggers are object specific. Triggers are object specific. Even when we are writing the code of the trigger, we will say that this trigger on which object. This trigger is on which object we will specify it. Triggers are always linked to the object. Now, triggers are a custom Apex code. Triggers are custom Apex code that will execute the business logic automatically based on the certain events. Whatever the events that we are performing it, if I wanted to execute the business logic automatically on the creation of or on the update or on the delete, undelete, whenever I wanted to execute immediately, then we go for a trigger. Now, by using this trigger, we can implement a complex business logic. We can implement a complex validation, like what are the validations we have implemented in the admin. So those are the very minimum, like a invalidation rule, whatever we are writing, minimum things. But in the code, you can implement a complex validation. That means on fly you wanted to calculate something, you can go for a trigger, or else deduplication. You can implement a deduplication process, and the complex transaction flows can be implemented using the triggers. And by using the triggers, we can perform a DML operations like a insert, update, delete, undelete, upsert, merge. These everything can be tracked using the trigger. And this is on the all the object and all the records. There is no restriction that this trigger works only for this object or this object. Triggers can implement in the standard object. Triggers can be implemented on the custom object. And we can retrieve these records from the objects by using the SOQL query. In the trigger, we write a SOQL query. Based on the SOQL query, we retrieve the information from the database. And triggers can be fired before inserting the data inside the database or after the insertion or after update. That means triggers can be executed before as well as the after operation on the object. Now each trigger should be associated with the object, and object can have a one or more number of triggers. You can have a more number of triggers, but as per the standard, so developers or a Salesforce tells us, like everybody follows, is per object we will write a single trigger. Per object we will write a single trigger. So that means, for example, let's take a scenario. Now I have a lead object and there is a custom object. Assume that maybe customer object is there. Now here customer is the custom object. Now from the customer, we have a lookup relationship to the lead object. This is a lookup relationship. Now assume that we have a multiple requirements. Assume that we have a multiple requirements, like on the same object. Let's assume that on the customer object. On the customer object, we have a multiple requirements. So first requirement, it says that whenever the record is created, whenever the customer record is created, need to copy the certain information. Like whenever it is created, we need to update, or we need to update the certain fields. Update fields. Right? So this is one requirement. Second one is whenever in case if the record is deleted. In case if the record is deleted, then on the parent object, we need to update the count. We need to update the count. And the third one is, now assume that maybe whenever we are updating it, like whenever the existing customer record, when the existing customer record is updated, then let's assume that related information also need to be updated. Related records information has to be updated. Now, like this, you have a 3 requirements. And in the real time, 3 members, and that means 3 developers are working on it. If the 3 developers are working on it, usually what the team does is, for every requirement, they will implement a trigger. For this requirement, they will implement one trigger. They will implement one trigger. And the second one, they will implement another trigger and trigger 2. And the third one, they will implement another trigger. Now, multiple triggers we are implementing on the only one object, right? Only one object we are implementing the multiple triggers, which we should not do it. This is the wrong implementation. Now, Salesforce allows to do that. Salesforce is not going to restrict that, but it's not a good practice. The good practice is write only single trigger, write only single trigger, and in that single trigger, try to implement all the logic within this trigger. Whatever this trigger is there within this, try to implement all the logic. Right, so one method is for the first one, another method is for the second one, another method is for the third one. Now here, when this method should be executed, when this method should be executed, when this method should be executed, that trigger will decide it. Now, this is the best practice in the trigger. Do not write the multiple triggers. Take a notes of it. Done? Taken the notes? Okay. So now let's see the syntax of how to write a trigger. So whenever we are writing a trigger, trigger always starts with the keyword called trigger. Whenever we are implementing the trigger class, trigger always starts with the keyword called trigger. And then you need to specify the trigger name. You need to specify the trigger name on, specify the object name. On, specify the object name. Now trigger name on, object name, and what is the events. Now this we will see right now. So basically trigger name on the object. Which object you are implementing a trigger? Account object or a opportunity object or a contact object or any custom object. So specify the object name. API name you have to specify it here, and class will have a this parameter. So in the parameter, it is going to specify the events. Specify the events. Then open the class. And within this class, we will write a business logic. So this is the syntax at the high level. Trigger syntax at the high level. So trigger name on object name. In the bracket, you will specify the trigger events. You will specify the trigger events, and within the trigger, you will write the business logic. You will write business logic. Take a notes of it. Now, let's say example, trigger, account trigger. This is the class name on account object. On account object bracket trigger events. And then we will write a logic. Similarly, trigger, case trigger. We are writing the on trigger, trigger we are writing on the object called case. So trigger, case trigger on case. And within this, we will write a business logic. Similarly, if there is any custom object, if it is a custom object, trigger the class name, let's say position trigger on the custom object name is a position. And within this, we will write a business logic. Within this, we will write a business logic. Now here, if you see here, this is the class name. Trigger is the standard. Here trigger is a standard keyword. After that, we'll have a class name. Account trigger, case trigger, position trigger. On is the standard one. On is basically on which object you are writing it. So object name, you have to specify this. If you are writing a trigger on the object account, then you need to specify the account. If you are writing a trigger on the case object, you need to specify the case. If you are writing a trigger on the position object, it has to be position object name. Position object name. Take a notes of it. Okay. Now trigger events, we will see what are those trigger events. No. So basically trigger, we will write it for the bulk. We do not write a trigger for a single record. We do not write a trigger for a single record. We write a trigger for the bulk. Now, when you have a huge volume of the more than like a 10 lakhs, if you have a more than 10 lakhs, do not go for a trigger. Go for a batch class if you are updating anything. Because if the 10 lakhs record, simply if you are pushing the data to the Salesforce, like a data loader, using the data loader, you are inserting the records inside the account object. More than 10 lakhs records are there. Now, every record, if you want to execute the trigger, no, do not go for that. Insert it later when nobody is available, execute the asynchronous process. Now, take a notes of it. It's a just keyword. Here starting word trigger is just a standard keyword, right? So like whenever you are writing a class, if you are writing a class, you will start with the access modifier, either public or global or private, right? You will start writing the class like this. If it is a trigger, triggers are always starts with a trigger. We do not use the access modifier in the trigger. Trigger is always starts with the keyword called trigger. Now let's see the trigger events. Now we know that trigger is a keyword class name on object. Now here we have a trigger events. Now what are these trigger events? Now trigger events are, by using the trigger events, we can indicate when the trigger should get fired. When the trigger get fired. That means we have two things in the trigger. Now, whatever the user is updating on the user interface, whatever the user is updating on the user interface, this is on the user, that means the UI part of it, the Salesforce application, and this is the database. Now, whatever the user is updating here, now before sending into this, right, it will go to the database. Before inserting any data, do you want to execute any logic? Do you want to execute any logic? That means before inserting the data, do you want to execute any logic? Or before updating the logic, do you want to execute it? Or before deleting, do you want to execute it? Now, once the data is inserted, after inserting the data in the database, we will send the response back to the UI, right? So the Salesforce we will receive. Now, once it is inserted, do you want to execute any business logic here? That means the trigger is going to perform before and after. Before and after. When it should fire? Do you want to fire the trigger before or do you want to fire the trigger after? Do you want to fire the trigger after? Now, before or after, multiple. So here it is going to cross verify multiple events. Now, Apex says, now Salesforce has provided the different trigger events. One is before insert, before update, before delete, and then after insert, after update, after delete, after undelete. After undelete. So these are the 7 events Salesforce has provided. So in the before, you will have a three options: insert, update, delete. Whereas after, you will have a 4. Because undelete can happen only the after undelete. There is nothing called as a before undelete. It's already deleted. The data is already deleted here. When you undelete it back to the database, that means this is the recycle bin and this is the database. So from the recycle bin, when you are pushing back to the here, now before undelete, you wanted to perform anything, there won't be nothing. After undelete, that means you did undelete here. After undelete, do you want to update anything in the database? So that's the reason undelete is available only in the after, not in the before. So total, we have a 7. Take a note of it. Yeah, so we have a logging system. So we will see the logging system because if we are performing the long operation using the trigger, and triggers are immediate execution, right? So whenever the user has updated, at the same time, if another user is performing something, we do not want to update two users at a time on the same record. So definitely we have to do the logging. So we will see the logging system. Now taking the notes of this. So let's see the one by one trigger events. The first one is the before insert. Before insert, in the before insert, this is basically this event fire the trigger before inserting a new record inside the object. This is only for the new records, not for the existing records. Only for new records, whenever the record is inserted in before inserting into the database, if you want to execute certain logic, then we will go for a before insert. Now, what are the scenarios that we will go for a before insert? So, there are certain scenarios like if you want to assign the values to the fields, that means in the account, we have a two address informations are there. We have a two address information. One is a billing address and second one is a shipping address. Now, sometimes whatever the billing address is there, it's the same shipping address is same as a billing address, or else sometimes it might be different. Now, when you say like instead of repeating the whatever the address I have entered and same thing I need to enter here. Instead of user entering this, we will add a one checkbox. Billing address is same as a shipping address. If it is a same as a shipping address, then what we will do in the before insert, whatever the address is entered in the billing address, same thing we will copy into the shipping address. That is before inserting the data. That means I'm adding the values to the shipping address, which is the same as the billing address. Or else, if you want to do the some custom validations, before inserting the record inside the database, I wanted to validate certain information. And it is a complex logic. I need to verify multiple conditions I need to verify. If the multiple conditions are matching, then only I'm going to insert the data. So that is a custom validations or else. Another scenario is a eliminating the duplicates. So duplicate, eliminate process, like eliminating the what are the duplications are there. Or else if you want to check the level of permission, right, whatever the user has entered, whether the user has entered with the, does the person is having a valid permissions, or maybe he has a read edit, but maybe we wanted to check certain different level of permissions, you can verify it. This is at the object level. Similarly, you can do it at the field level also. So example for before insert. So trigger account. This is the account trigger on the account object. Account trigger on the account object. And here the event is before insert. Before insert. And we will write the value logic inside this class. So account trigger is the class name. Take a notes of it. Now, let's move on. The next event is before update. Before update. So before update is, now by using this event, we can perform the trigger on the before update record, before updating the existing record inside the object. That means the record is already there in the system. The record is already there in the database. Now we are updating the certain information on the database. Now when we update the certain information, now before it is going to update in the database, I wanted to verify, cross-verify certain details in the record level. Now let's see the scenarios for the before update. Now custom validations, I wanted to cross-verify the custom validations and deduplication custom fields. And if you want to check the permissions like a field level permission, object level permission, record level permissions, these you can cross verify. Example, now account trigger on the account object. Here the event is before update. Before update. Now inside this we will write a business logic and then we close the class. Take a notes of it. Now the next one is before delete. Now for the before delete, now this event will fire whenever before deleting the data or a record from the object. That means before it is deleting the record from the database, we wanted to perform logic. So in that case, we will go for a before delete. The scenarios is like a business logic to verify the record level permissions or object level permissions, or else whenever we are removing it. Now I wanted to calculate the roll-up summary field. Right, before deleting, I wanted to count what are the parent level. If I have a count of the child records, if I wanted to calculate those records, I can perform in the before delete. So this is for the lookup relationship. For the lookup relationship, we cannot create a roll-up summary field, right? So in that case, what we can do using that trigger, we can do all these updates. Example, like a trigger, account trigger on the account before delete. And then we'll have a validation one. And the next one is after insert. After insert is this event will fire trigger on the after inserting the record inside the object. Now, once the record is inserted inside the database, Salesforce database.com, now then I wanted to perform logic execution. Then we will go for a after insert. So scenarios are like I wanted to send a notification, an email alert, or let's say based on this record, based on the current record, I wanted to update the related records data. Once the data is updated in the current object, then I need to update the related record information. Then I'll go for a after insert, or else after inserting the data or after inserting the record inside the database.com, want to share the record to the another user, or else I need to assign the record to the users or to and update the roll-up summary fields. If you want to do these all information, these are the different scenarios. There are many different scenarios for the after insert. Now, example trigger, account trigger on the account after insert. Now, this is we can inside this, we can write the business logic. Take a notes of it. Next one is after update. So far we have seen the before insert, before update, before delete, after insert. Now it is a after update. Now this event is going to fire once the data is updated, once the record is updated on the existing records, on the existing record inside the object, which is called after update. The scenarios are same scenarios can also work, like once the record is updated, if you want to send a notification email, you wanted to send it, then you can send the emails. Or else updating the role of summary field for the lookup relationship and sharing the mechanism if you want to implement a custom sharing mechanism. Or else assignments, you wanted to do the assignments, the owner assignment, right? So assigned to the queue or a user based on the logic, we will be doing the assignments. Now example for this, trigger account trigger on the account and the event is after update. Now inside this we can write a multiple validations here. So this is at the class level. Inside this we can write a business logic. And the next one is after delete. After delete is nothing but once the data is deleted, once the record is deleted from the existing record. Existing, whatever the existing records are there, if it is deleted from the database.com, then if you want to execute a logic, then we will go for a after delete. So few scenarios are like a roll up summary field. Once the record is deleted, I wanted to reduce the count in the parent object for the child record count. And once the record is deleted, I wanted to remove the lookup relationship or wherever it is linked to the lookup relationship. In case if you are deleting the parent record, now whenever you are deleting the parent record, and if you want to just remove the reference field in the child, you can remove the reference field in the child and just remove it. Instead of deleting the child record also, just remove the reference and then we can delete the parent record. So these are the scenarios when work on the after delete. Now, example, trigger after trigger account trigger on the account object and event is after delete. And within this, we will write a business logic. Similarly, the last one which we have after undelete. After undelete is nothing but this event will fire the trigger once the once we do the undelete. Once the deleted record has been restored back to the actual object, then if you want to perform a logic, then we will go for it after undelete. So the scenarios is if it is undeleted, right? So once it is restored the information, if I wanted to update the customer that your data is back to the our database.com, then you can send an email notification. Or else if you want to update the roll up summary field, you can use the roll up summary field. And after undeleting it, if you wanted to share a record, again you need to start sharing it. Because once we delete the record, sharing will go away. Now, as soon as I do the undelete, again you wanted to implement the sharing concept. And assignment also you wanted to do. In that case, you can go for a assign after undelete. And these are the different scenarios we can use for the after undelete. Example is trigger account trigger on account after undelete. And then within this, we will write a business logic. So based on the requirement, so we have a total 7 events are there. Now these 7 events, you can use one at a time or else you can use more than one also. You can use more than one. It's not necessary that your class name and object name should be the same, but it is a best practice. Because if you open the triggers in the Salesforce, like how do you open the triggers from the Salesforce? Now go to the setup and here search for a Apex trigger. Now if you search for a Apex trigger, if you search for Apex triggers, when you search for a Apex triggers, you will see all the triggers that are displaying here. Now, just by looking at the name, how do you know that this trigger is on account, or this trigger is on the opportunity, or this trigger is on the contact, or this trigger is on the position? You will not know. You will not know the which this trigger is implemented on which object. So what is the best practice is whenever you are creating the trigger, better to use the object name and then specify the trigger so that it is easier for tomorrow anybody to understand just by looking at the trigger name here. Okay, this trigger is implemented on the account. So that's how we follow in the real time. Now, so in the real time, you might use a single event here, or you might use a multiple events like a after update, after undelete. At a time, you can use the multiple events here. Now, all the trigger informations, whatever we are implementing a trigger, everything sits inside the object called Apex trigger. There is a object is Apex trigger. Now, how do you know that where can I see the object? You will not see from the object manager. You have to go to the file, open, and here select the object. Now select here Apex trigger. Apex trigger. Now here you have a Apex trigger. Click on this Apex trigger. ID, name, that should be totally fine. API version. And if you want to check whether it is active or not, is valid, status, query. Executed. So here you will be seeing the what is the name of the trigger and what is the API version which is used and is the valid trigger or not, whether the status is the trigger is active or not. So whenever we implement a trigger, trigger has to go with, it has to be always active. Always active. Now I'll show you that whenever we are creating the trigger, we'll show that where it should be active or not. Now here it is going to show this is the object, all the triggers will be stored into the object called Apex trigger. And each trigger code will be stored inside the file using the extension called .apxt. Now whenever we are creating any trigger, now let's click on this. In order to create a trigger, click on this new and do not select the Apex class. This time select the Apex trigger. Click on this Apex trigger. For example, I'm creating the trigger on the account. Now I'll specify here account trigger. Account trigger. Now the S object is account. You need to specify the S object account and what is the name of the trigger. Specify the name of the trigger here. Click on it, submit. Now as soon as we click on it, submit, if you see here, the extension for the trigger is .apxt. The extension for normal Apex classes, APXC. Right? If it is a C is there, that is a class. If it is a T, that means it is a trigger. Now, by default, it starts with a trigger keyword. By default, it starts with a trigger keyword. And this is the class name which we have specified on the object is account object. And the event is by default, Salesforce is showing the before insert. By default, Salesforce is showing the before insert. Right? So this is how whenever we create a trigger, the extension is .apxt and the default, the class structure will be trigger, account trigger on the account before insert. Now, if you want to implement a multiple events here, if you want to implement a multiple events, you can say here before insert, after insert, or after update, after delete. Now you can write multiple events here. Now if you want all 7 events, you can write all 7 events. Or if you want to write a single event, you can write a single event. So event is going to inform the system this class might fire it on the before insert, or this class might fire on the after insert. This class might fire on the after update, or this class might fire on the after delete. So this is basically to tell the system whenever the records are created, this class is going to fire on any of these events, Now, this is at the high level. This is at the high level. Now, once we have written in the high level, now inside this, we will write a business logic, right? We will write a business logic. Now, when I'm writing the business logic, is this business logic should be executed for all these 7 events? Might be. Sometimes business logic, I might need to execute it for the all 7 events. That means whenever the before insert, execute the same logic, after insert, execute the same logic, after updates, execute the same logic, after delete, also execute the same logic. But sometimes, most of the times in the real time, before insert, there will be a different business logic. After insert, execute the different business logic. After update, execute the different business logic. After delete, execute the different business logic. Now, when we have to execute a different logic based on the event, now who will tell inside the system? Now, this is at the high level, it is telling to the system, these are the events. But inside this, what are the business logic is there? Now, when this business logic should be executed, if you do not specify anything, this logic gets executed for all 7 events. This logic is executed for all 7 events. But inside this, when we want a business logic to distribute for the each event, how can we do it? So that is based on the trigger context variables. We have a trigger context variables. Trigger context variables are, by using this feature, we can identify the current status of the trigger. What is the current status of the trigger? So that we can segregate the code or a business logic to be executed based on the event. Now there are 10 context variables are there. One is a Boolean trigger dot is insert. Boolean trigger dot is insert. Boolean trigger dot is update. Boolean trigger dot is delete. Boolean trigger dot is undelete. Boolean trigger dot is before. Boolean trigger dot is after. And then we'll have a trigger dot old map, trigger dot new map. Right? These are the total 10 context variables are there. Mostly we use these 10 context variables in the real time. Now, take a notes of it, then we will see the definitions of each one of them.
Ma'am, I have a scenario like I'm trying to insert a record in account object. So on the top of that, the trigger has been placed. Okay. So before insert, there is a logic coming which we written for checking another object, some records or something. Okay. So if it got failed, can we track that error and the catch block? Can we catch that error in the catch block?
Yes, we can.
So how it will be like showcase in the front end? Is it failure by? It was a failed at inserting in the record now account object like that, or trigger custom message. How we can do that?
Both the ways we can do it. On the Salesforce UI, you can show the error message to the users, or else you can track the information just for a backend purpose.
Okay.
Which slide you want, guys? This one? Taking the notes. Let's see. Now, Boolean trigger is insert. So Boolean trigger is insert is now it returns true. Now here we have a trigger dot is insert. Trigger dot is insert. What is the output of this trigger dot is insert is a Boolean. That means if it returns true, whatever this trigger dot is insert is there, if it is returns true, that means trigger has been fired because of the insert operation. Otherwise, it will fail. Otherwise, else condition, it is a false. It did not fire. That means this is the false because it is maybe they are doing the update operations or they might be doing the delete operation. Whenever it is not a insert, then it will give you the false condition. Similarly, Boolean trigger is update. Now, whatever this trigger dot is update is there, if it returns true, that means this trigger has been fired because of the update operation. Because of update operation. Now, else it will be false. Similarly, Boolean trigger dot is delete. If it is a true, that means trigger has been fired for the delete operation. If it is a false, then it will be false. Undelete, that means this is fired because of the undelete operation. And then else return the false. So this is going to inform the inside the trigger class. Inside the trigger, it is going to inform that whether it is fired for a insert record, whether it is fired for a update record, whether it is fired for the delete or undelete. Insert, update, or a delete or undelete. But we also want to know that is it a for before or after? So far we have seen insert, update, delete, undelete. Also we wanted to know whether it is a for the before or whether it is for the after. Now how do we know that whether it is a before or after? We have a context variable trigger dot is before. Trigger dot is before. Now I'm going to specify here it returns if the trigger is a about to perform the operation for the before. About the operation before, then it will be there. Otherwise, it will be false. Now, trigger dot is after. It returns true if the trigger has been done with the operations. That means if you are doing the after operation, then it will give you the true. Otherwise, it returns false. Otherwise, it returns the false. Now, take a notes. Take a notes of this. Take the next one also. Okay, so let's move on. Now, so far we have seen insert, update, delete, undelete, and trigger dot is before, trigger dot is after. Now, there are few more we have. Trigger dot is executing. Trigger dot is executing. There is another one which is available. Trigger dot is executing. So trigger dot is executing is if it returns true. If it returns true, then that means it is continuous. It's performing the operation. Is it still executing it? Right? That means it is performing the execution currently. Otherwise, it will return false. Now, trigger.old map is trigger.old is what is the old value. Now, old map is nothing but what are the current value and the old value. If you want to compare it, you can compare it. We will see the example scenarios with the trigger.old map, trigger.new map. Now, and the next we have a trigger size. Now, trigger size is a integer. It's not a Boolean, it's a integer. Now, for this integer, it returns the number of records that has been included in the invocation. That means which includes the old and new context variables. What is the size of it? Everything you will know. And there are few trigger dot operation types are there. That means we wanted to know that here we have a few example like a before underscore insert. It returns the event name. Operation type returns the event name. Because of which trigger because of which event or because of what happened, the trigger is fired it. Why the trigger has fired it? If you wanted to know, you can use the trigger dot operation type. It will give you the in the capital letter before underscore insert. If it is a fired because of the insert, before dot update. If it is a fired because of the before update, before dot delete. If it is a fired because of the delete. Now let's say example. Now, if I wanted to implement a trigger, so I'll say here, trigger is the starting trigger. I'll say account trigger, account trigger. This is the class name. On, we will specify the account. We will specify the account. And then within this, we'll have a events. Within this, we'll have a events. Events are, let's say, I'm going to write a before insert, or a after update, or after delete. After delete. Right, so this is the after delete. Trigger, whatever this account trigger, this is the class name on the account, and starting with whatever the bracket, and within this we have a before insert, after update, after delete. Inside this, we are going to write a business logic. Now here the business logic is, now I'm going to write a business logic. Now this business logic should be executed only for before insert. This business logic should be executed only for before insert. I need to execute this only for before insert. In that case, what we will do, we will use the trigger context variables. We use trigger context variables. How do I use it? If trigger dot is insert, if it is a insert, and trigger dot is before. Trigger dot is insert and trigger dot is before, then only execute this business logic. Then only execute this business logic. Now, in case if you are not writing here on top before insert, you are not writing the before insert on the top. But context variables, you have a before insert. If you do not write a event here, and if you are writing the context variable of a before insert, this logic will not execute it. This logic will execute when you have a event. That means you need to specify the first event here. You have to specify the before insert. Now then only it will go inside this. Now if you have the event, based on this event only context variable will get executed. If you do not write an event here, your context variable will not be executed. Sometimes few developers, what they will do is they will not write an event here. Simply they will write a context variable saying that if it is a before insert, business logic gets executed. No, it will not execute. You need to specify in the class, in the trigger class, you need to specify the event. Then only this gets executed. Now, similarly, if you want to execute the business logic for the after update, in that case, what you will do, you will write if trigger dot is update and trigger dot is after. If these two conditions are satisfied, then execute the business logic. This is the business logic. Execute the business logic. Now, similarly, if you want to execute the after delete, the business logic has to be executed after delete. Then write the trigger dot if trigger dot is after or is delete and trigger dot is after. Trigger dot is after. Now execute the business logic. Right? So this is how you write the trigger. Now, so far we have seen how to write a business logic normally for asynchronous, normal of X class, we have seen it, right? So only the difference is now you need to specify the events, context variables, then call the business logic. Then call the business logic. Now, sometimes few developers, what they will do is after is there in both of them. So how they will write it? They will simply write if trigger dot is after. Is after, they go inside this. Then divide it if trigger dot is update. If the trigger dot is update, then execute the business logic. Then if trigger dot is delete, then execute the business logic. So like this, they will write it. Instead of writing the after delete multiple times, what they will do, first on top level, they will write it after, and then inside this, they will write it update and delete. And inside the if condition, they will write a business logic. Take a notes of it. Done. Now, few developers write it like this, and there is another way of implementation also. Triggers can be implemented in another way. What is that another way? Is trigger account trigger on account. Now here I'm going to write a before insert, before update, after update, after delete. After delete. Now, here what we have written the trigger context variable, and then inside the trigger context variable, if trigger context variable is true, then business logic gets executed. Now, few developers, what they will do is they will use the operation type. We have a trigger dot operation type. We have a trigger dot operation type. Using this trigger dot operation type, also they will implement a trigger. Now, how to implement using this? We need to specify switch. We need to use the switch condition. Switch on, and then trigger dot operation type. Operation type. Switch on, trigger operation type. Now within this, we need to specify when operation types will have a standard, like a before insert. These are the standard one. You have to write it in the capital. Before insert. If it is a before insert, then execute the business logic. When after update. When after update, execute the business logic. When after delete, execute the business logic. Business logic. Right, if it is a after update, after delete. So when it is a before insert, execute the business logic. When it is a after update, execute the business logic. If it is a after delete, execute the business logic. So few developers write the trigger using the switch condition, and the operation which is called as a trigger dot operation type. Instead of the context variables, they will go for a trigger dot operation type. So using the trigger dot operation type, we'll perform it. Take a notes of it. Okay. Now let's move on. So the context variables are now here. Let's assume that account object. We have a account object. Right, switch is a faster performance, so that's the reason few developers will go for a switch. If condition is, it's a like if condition, the difference between the if and switch, I think I already covered in the basic session. What if does is it will go to the every condition. First, it will check this condition. If it is not false, go to this condition, this condition, this condition. Switch is compared to this one, switch is a faster. It immediately jump onto the whichever the operation type is there, it's just jump on that. So the operation for this or the execution for the switch is faster compared to the if condition. Now let's see. Assume that we have a, let's see. Okay. Now account object. The account object. Now here the account object is, we have a ID, name, rating. Now inside this account object, assume that I wanted to perform certain, maybe I need to create a record, or insert a record or update a record. Whenever we want to perform an insert update, immediate logic has to be executed. Whenever the immediate logic has to be executed, then I'll implement a trigger on the account object. We'll implement a trigger on the account object. So on the trigger, we will write a logic for the before insert. That means before inserting the record, I wanted to cross verify at the trigger level. We wanted to cross verify the business logic. If the trigger is qualified perfectly fine, then it will insert the data inside the account object. Now in the trigger, we will write a business logic, let's say phone number and industry. Now it will first, this is kind of a gate. This is kind of a gate. So it will cross verify here. If it is qualified here, then only it will insert inside the account object. It will insert the account object. Now, assume that there is a two records are created. We are inserting the records like a Akash. I have entered the rating warm, and while inserting it, trigger will execute the logic. First, trigger will take the logic because we have implemented a before insert. It will cross verify the data. If it is inserted correctly, it is going to cross verify this business logic. That means in the trigger, I'm going to verify, trigger is going to call this record and it is going to cross verify the data. And when it is cross verifying the data, it will store the information into the temporary memory. Right? It's not yet sent to the database.com. It's not yet sent to the database.com. First, a trigger will take the data and it will store it into the temporary memory like Akash it will store. Now, once it is stored into the temporary memory, the business logic gets executed. Now, based on this business logic, if everything goes fine, that means if it is a validation is successful, then the data will be inserted inside the account object. In case if there is any error while executing this business logic, if there is any error, it will go for a cancellation. It will cancel the operation and will show the validation failure. We can show the validation failure on the UI, on the Salesforce application. We can show why the trigger has been failed or why the execution has been failed. Because trigger is the immediate execution. So as the user enters the data and click on the save, if there is any error, immediately I can show it on the UI. Or else we can store the information in the backend in the one of the object, we can store it. Right, so here we have a one record. This is one record. But in the real time, we can have a more than one record. We can have more than one record. That means whether it is a one record or a multiple record, trigger should be able to handle. So in the real time, what we do is whenever we are implementing the logic in the trigger, we always write a trigger to handle the bulk records. Because sometimes it may be a single record, sometimes it may be a multiple records. Possible that there are 10 users who are performing the 10 records. That means just a seconds is the difference, but they are creating the records or updating the records. We cannot, because the one user is updating the record one, I cannot say user to record two, right? So we have a multiple records they are performing. So this is the record one, record two, record three, record four, record five, like this. Single user, each user is performing the each records. Now, as this user is performing the record one, I cannot say that, okay, do not perform the record two. Both the records are different. Both the data is different. So if it is performing the multiple records, if we are performing the multiple records, maybe seconds are different, then trigger should be able to handle the logic for the list or a collection. Trigger should be able to handle the collection of records. So that's the reason we have a to handle the collection of records. We have a concept here: trigger.new, trigger.old, trigger.new map, trigger.old map. Right? So these are the trigger.new will be always holds the collection list of the information. It always holds the list of the information. Now, in the context variable, we have a list S object data type trigger.new. Trigger.new is the one. So trigger.new is the context variable which contains the current context records, whatever the current records currently it is processing. It could be a single record, it could be a multiple records that are done by the multiple customers. So trigger.new can handle the single record and multiple records. That means all the newly inserted records will get placed inside the trigger.new for the validation. Now syntax will be list of S object data type trigger.new. List of S object data type trigger.new. Take a notes of it. Now, okay. Now let's see. So here trigger.new contains the trigger.new. Basically, it contains the list of collection of information, collection of records. Now trigger.new. Now this variable returns a list of the new records. Right now, currently, what are the new records are created? If we can say that new version, what are the current record we are creating, or a new version of the S object records. And this list is only available in insert, update, and undelete triggers. Now, if you have to write a logic for the trigger.new, how do we write it? Now we know that trigger.new is contains a collection of records. That means whatever the newly created records are there in the S object, those records will be available. Now let's say here I'm writing the logic trigger. I'm going to write, let's say, account trigger on account, and we are writing the before insert. Before insert. This is the only one event. Now within this, I'm going to specify, when you have a one event, you need not to specify the context variables. You need not to specify the context variables, because whatever the business logic I am writing it, only it will execute it for the before insert. There is no other event here. Right? So context variables are not needed. If you think maybe in future I might add it here few more events. Now in that case, what you do is add it here. If trigger dot is insert, if it is a insert and trigger dot is before. There. What I need to do, I need to get the collection of records. Now, collection of records in the trigger, how can I get the records? Whatever the user is entering here. Now here user is entering on the UI. User is entering on the UI. Now, as soon as the user enter the information and click on the submit button, immediately my trigger should capture. Immediately my trigger should be captured. Now it is data is not yet saved into the database. Data is not yet saved into the database. I cannot query the SOQL. I cannot do the SOQL because data is not yet inserted within the database.com. It is not done. Directly from the UI, it has to retrieve the information in the trigger. Now, how can I retrieve it? Using the trigger.new. Using the trigger.new. Now, what I'll do is for loop account ACC colon trigger.new. Trigger.new. Now, inside this trigger.new, I can perform any business logic. Now, directly, in order to get the information from the Salesforce application to the trigger, you need to use the context variable, which is called as a trigger.new. Now, inside this, you can write a business logic. Let's say ACC dot rating equal to hot or rating equal to warm. And then you can update or whatever you wanted to do, you can perform it here. Right? So this is how we use the trigger.new in the Salesforce. Take a notes of it. Yes, trigger. Finally, the trigger will be stored in the database.com. Which object it is going to store? Trigger object. Trigger object. Where is this trigger object? Trigger object is within the database.com. In the database.com, I have a table. The table name is a trigger. Now, whatever the logic we are implementing it, this entire logic will be stored inside the object called trigger. Once you save this record, once you save this class, this is general record, and this is whatever you are writing here, entire logic, it gets converted into the some information, and the record will be saved inside the object. Like we have a account object, right? So account object, whatever the user is entering, it is stored in the database like a record information. Similarly, whatever the logic I am writing it in the backend in the RDBMS, right, it will be stored as a record. So this trigger is a one record. This is record ID, this is the class name, and these are the information will be there. This is a record. Now, as soon as the user is entering the information, now immediately it will check, do I have any triggers implemented on Salesforce? It directly, it will not go to the database. It will not go to the database. Here we have a certain logic Salesforce has written. Now here it is going to check, is there any triggers are there? Now, if the triggers are available, okay, Salesforce is going to cross verify. It does not cross verify the data. No, it's not going to go to the account object. It is not going to the go to account object. It will go to the based on this. Okay, this validation is there. This is trigger is implemented on this object. So only go to the this particular record and get this record. And it will get this record. What is the logic is written in this record? Now we are checking the trigger.new. That means go and get the information from this UI. So that everything is Salesforce is going to take care. No, taking the notes. Done. Let's move on. Shall I move on? Let me know once it is done. Shall I move on? Okay. So let's move on. Now this is the trigger.new. Right, so whatever we have seen, it's a trigger.new. Now next one, let's see another scenario. Now, same object, account object. In the account object, we have a ID, name, rating. Assume that there are already records are available inside the Salesforce. Right, so inside the Salesforce database, already records are available. There are few records which I have already there. Now on top of this account object, we have written the trigger and the event is before update. Event is before update. Now on this before update, we have written the business logic, right? So business logic is phone industry. Before update is nothing but the data is already available in the database.com. The data is already available in the database.com and Salesforce and the users are trying to update the information. Assume that rating information they wanted to update. Rating, they want to update it here. Now that means I need to get what are the records are there in the existing database to the trigger. If I wanted to get that information, we definitely have to use the SOQL query. That is the basic thing. We need to use the SOQL query. But here what we can do is we have a based on the SOQL query, I can get the information, like I can query and get the information that are exist inside the database.com. And if I want to update the rating, so what SOQL query I'll write it. Let's say that SOQL query that I'm going to write it, list of account, ACC list equal to select ID, comma name, comma rating from account. Maybe I wanted to update the rating. So where condition, where rating is equal to hot, then those records I wanted to update it. Those records I wanted to update. This is the SOQL query. Now, once we have written the SOQL query, now based on the SOQL query, I got the information of these three records. Wherever the hot is, sorry, wherever the rating is a warm. Now I wanted to update is wherever the rating is not equal to hot. Wherever the rating is not equal to hot, I wanted to get those records. So these three records, it is getting the information. Now here we have this data is available. Now what we will do, I'll loop through these records. And finally we will assign the new values to these records. We will assign the new values wherever the rating is warm is there. We will update it to the hot and finally we will update it. So once the update to the DP, now as soon as it will go to the trigger, it will check the validation. If everything is perfectly fine, then it will update the values here, rating for all the records. Right? Now this is generic. Now here, whatever the data that we are getting it using the SOQL query and assigning the new values and updating to the account object. Now in this case, this is the old data and this is the new data, right? So here we call it, this holds the trigger.old. This holds the trigger.old. That means this is the old data. Trigger.old contains the list. It contains the old data list. And what is the latest one? Latest one is new version is trigger.new. This is the new version. This new version contains the list information. Right, so trigger.old contains the list information, trigger.new also contains the list information. In case sometimes instead of a list, I want the map details. That means map information. That means for each ID, what are the values that is holding it? That means for this ID, I wanted to get every data, every field data, I wanted to get it and store it into the map collection. In case if you want that information to be stored in the trigger, we use the trigger.old map. And for the new one, we use the trigger.new map. We use the trigger.new map. Now here trigger.old is let's take here trigger.old. Trigger.old contains a collection of records. Collection of records. And trigger.old. Trigger.old is basically it returns the this variable returns the this variable returns a list of the old S object records. Old S object records. And this list is only available for update and delete trigger. You cannot find this trigger.old for a insert. You cannot find this trigger.old for a undelete. Only it is available for update and delete. Only it will be available for update and delete. Now, if I have to write this trigger.old, the scenario if I have to write like a trigger, let's say account trigger, let's create it on the opportunity. Every time I'm creating the account, like a opportunity trigger, op trigger on opportunity, right? I'm going to write here before update. Only for update and delete. I cannot use the insert before update. Now, I need to loop through the old records, whatever the existing records are there. Existing records, whatever the existing records are there, I wanted to loop through the existing records. That means how can I loop? For loop opportunity, right? OPP, whatever the old records are there, old OPP colon trigger.old. Trigger.old. That means whatever the records are there, get those records. Get those records. Now here you wanted to check whether the old one, what are the old records are there. Now, for example, you want to cross verify the old record and the new record. Old record and the new record you wanted to cross verify. Assume that if the, let's say scenario is if old ID and equal to new ID is both are same. Now you are updating some record. So whatever you have updated that will store into the trigger.new. Whatever the old one is there, it will be there in the old. So for example, there is a already opportunity record is there. Assume that opportunity record. Let's take the opportunity record here. Go to this Salesforce, go to the opportunity, and we have a Dell opportunity record. Dell opportunity record. This is the Dell opportunity record. Dell opportunity record. For this record, you want to check whatever the old amount is there. Whatever the old amount is there, old opportunity dot amount, right? If it is not equal to same. Now somebody has made a changes. You can make a changes to the any value, but somebody has made a changes to the amount. In that case, you want to identify whatever the my old opportunity amount and the new opportunity amount. If it is not equal to same, if it is not equal to same, Then show error message. Show error message saying that you cannot modify the amount. Amount cannot be changed. Amount cannot be changed. Now this is the scenario. For this, first I am querying the old data. Now next I need to get the whatever the data that I am updating it, I need to get new information. Opportunity, new OPP colon trigger dot new. Trigger dot new. Now here I'm going to check if my old opportunity ID, if my old opportunity ID equal to whatever the new opportunity ID, if both are same. If both are same and my old opportunity amount is not equal to new opportunity amount. That means somebody made a changes. In this case, I'm going to show error message. Show error message. Amount, opportunity amount cannot be modified. Opportunity amount cannot be modified. So this is how we check it. This will work for the single record, multiple record, because I'm not specifying check only this logic for only this record, check this logic only for this record. No, I'm not specifying it. This is the generic I'm writing it in the trigger so that this trigger will work for the multiple records. Yes, it is allowed. You can do that. Maximum 2 you can do it, 3 also you can do it, but maximum 2 is enough. Do not go for more down. Take a notes of it. Yeah, trigger.old is only for update and delete. What do you mean by it will have a number of records? Yeah. Now let's see. All the old records, whatever the existing records are there in the database. Now these all are is a trigger.old. This is already there in the database, Salesforce database.com. Whatever the records are available in the Salesforce database.com for this particular object, everything is contains by the trigger.old. List of the old records. List of the old S object records. Whenever we are writing a trigger, we should not write a trigger for a single record or a specific record. It has to be written for the generic, like if you are performing for the any record, it should be able to handle whether it is a one record or multiple record. So that's the reason we do not specify the IDs here. In case if you have any specific requirement, then only we will go for it. Otherwise, we will not go for a record specific. Taken the notes. Done. Okay. It's not a good practice for inside for, but if your requirement says that you need to query the both old records and new records. Now, otherwise, how you will do? Otherwise, what you need to do? You need to separate this for loop, right? Store all the old ones into the one list, and then again query the new map, new one, again store it into the another one. That means you need to create a list of, right, differently. Now, same thing, what you can do is, in case if you do not want to do for loop, for within the for, now if you want to divide this, now get this out, let's remove this and close this for loop here. Now get all the list of the old opportunities. So list of opportunity, OPP, old OPP list equal to new list of opportunity store all the opportunity list dot add OPP, old opportunities. This is one for loop. Now next one is another for loop. Now here, let's take out this logic. Now again, you write another list here. List of the new. Now store all this information dot add new OPP. Right, this is the OPP. Now whatever this OPP ID. Now you need to find out whether the list contains this ID or not. List contains this ID or not. Now you need to find out list contains. Right, so you can use the list contents. Yeah, that's true. So it is a rare scenario that you will have maximum everything will be done. So that's a rare scenario. Now here, in case if you want to divide it, store it into the separate list, and you use the list, whatever the methods are there, list contains this particular opportunity ID. That means you need to look through the one opportunity here, right? And look through the one opportunity and check that that particular ID is available in this. If it is available, then again you need to get the entire information of this record and check here the information. So it's a long, maybe we'll go for a 10 to 10 lines of code. Okay, so we will see the trigger.new map and trigger.old map tomorrow. Time is not enough, it's at 10 o'clock. We will see tomorrow. Okay, so I'll ping you the trial head links. That's all for today.